The extra shadow in his mirror grew taller every mile. He let it in at dawn. There are roads in this country, and in every country, that have a weight to them. Not as folklore, not as local color, but structurally. Places where the specific density of loss is high enough and concentrated enough and old enough that it has changed the character of the space itself. You feel it sometimes when you pass through. A quality of thickness in the air, a persistent sense of having just missed something that was there a moment ago. Long-haul drivers know these roads better than anyone. They spend their working lives in them, alone, in the specific psychological state produced by hours of highway monotony, a waking trance, a half-alert, where the ordinary boundaries of perception become a little more permeable than they are in the daylight hours of daylight lives. Derek Marsh drove the overnight routes for 11 years. He was methodical, careful, a good driver by every professional measure. He had been told, early in his career, that the roads did things at night that they didn't do in daylight. He had attributed this to exhaustion and the human mind's tendency toward pattern making in low stimulation environments. He had been driving for 11 years without an extra shadow. Then he took the Hartfield run. The A303 stretch between Chicklade and Mere has the highest concentration of documented road fatalities per mile in that part of Wiltshire, though the documentation is spread across 7 decades, and no single cause has ever unified them into a pattern that satisfies an official inquiry. Derek Marsh knew this the way he knew most things about his routes, absorbed through the informal network of drivers who share this information the way fishermen share information about currents. Not as warning exactly, more as navigational data. He had driven the Hartfield run 4 times in 11 years and had found it unremarkable. Long, rural, 2 lanes for much of it. The kind of road that required attention without offering stimulation. He took it on a Thursday in February, departing the depot at 2 a.m. for a delivery with a 6 a.m. window. The cargo, a palletized consignment of pharmaceutical supplies to a hospital in Exeter. He was alone, as he was always alone on overnight runs, with a thermos of coffee and a radio that he kept low because the company's dashcam policy required him to demonstrate alertness, and he found, after 11 years, that the radio's presence rather than its content served this function. He saw the shadow at 3:40 a.m. He had been on the A303 for 40 minutes. The road was empty. Not occasionally empty, the way rural roads are empty at night, but absolutely, specifically empty, the kind of absence that is not merely statistical but qualitative. No oncoming lights for 30 minutes, no following lights, the truck's headlights cutting a channel through the dark and nothing. In the mirror, but his own cab interior and the dark rectangle of the road behind. Then the shadow. It was in the lower left section of his rear-view mirror, a shape against the road surface behind the truck that was not the truck's shadow, which would be ahead of him in the headlights rather than behind. A human-shaped shadow, standing in the road, growing smaller as the truck moved away from it, in the way that things in a rearview mirror grow smaller as you drive away from them. He watched it for 30 seconds. He checked the wing mirrors. Nothing. He looked at the road ahead. He looked back at the rear view. The shadow was still there, same position, relative to the road. now slightly smaller, but maintaining the same proportion as the truck moved, which meant it was moving with the truck. He told himself it was a processing artifact, a combination of road surface irregularity and the particular optical geometry of rearview mirrors at 3:40 a.m. after 90 minutes of low stimulation driving. He delivered the pharmaceutical supplies. He drank the rest of the thermos. He drove the return route. On the return, on the same stretch of the A303, the shadow was in the mirror before he reached Chicklade. Same position, same shape, same movement, maintaining distance quality. He noted, this time, a detail he had not registered on the first pass. The shadow was taller than it had been at 3:40 a.m., not by a dramatic amount, not doubled, not grotesquely elongated, but specifically taller by a proportion, he estimated, with the eye of a man who spent his working life measuring load dimensions, at approximately 15%. He did not take the Hartfield run for 3 weeks. When he returned to it, necessity, a scheduling gap, the Hartfield run the only available Exeter window. The shadow was in the mirror within 10 minutes of entering the stretch. Taller again. He estimated the increase from the previous sighting at another 20%. He was a methodical man. He kept a log. The shadow appeared on every Hartfield run and on no other route. He confirmed this over the following 6 weeks by accepting 2 additional long runs, different roads, different hours, and watching the mirror with the specific attention of a man who was no longer performing generalized vigilance but targeted surveillance. Nothing on the A361 or the A36. The Hartfield A303 stretch. Shadow, every time, growing. He researched the stretch's history. The 7 decades of fatalities were documented in local council records, transport authority reports, and the particular informal archive of the Wiltshire-based drivers community. He mapped them. The fatality sites concentrated in a 7-mile section that aligned exactly with the stretch where the shadow appeared. He posted in the drivers' forum on a Thursday night, phrasing carefully, not, "I am seeing a shadow, but anyone else notice anything unusual on the Hartfield A303 stretch after 3 a.m.? The responses were more numerous and less surprised than he had expected. One driver, username Wiltshire Knight, replied, "Don't look at it directly. Don't stop. Don't let it get level with the cab. If it gets level with the cab, it means it thinks you've been on that stretch long enough to count as its road." He replied, "How do you know when it thinks that?" Wiltshire Knight. It stops following and starts walking beside you, in the headlights. You'll see the shadow on the road surface, even though there's nothing to cast it. That's when you need to be gone. He did not see it walking beside him. Not yet. He kept driving the route because the route was work, and the shadow had not, in 6 weeks, done anything except grow. The passenger remnant, the name appeared in a single regional folklore compilation published by a Wiltshire historian in 1987 and photocopied into the driver community's informal archive with the specific status of a thing everyone has read and nobody talks about directly, is not a ghost in any individual sense. It is an accumulation, a fusion of every death energy from every fatality on a given stretch of road, coalesced over time into a single ambulatory presence that carries the composite of every consciousness that expired there. Not malevolent, the historian's account specified, with the careful neutrality of someone making a distinction they find important. not malevolent, hungry. Specifically hungry for the experience of transit, for the movement of road passage, which every component of it was in the process of experiencing when it lost the capacity to experience. It wanted to ride. The historian noted 3 historical accounts of drivers who had stopped, pulled over, opened the door, for various stated reasons, and been found subsequently in the passenger seat, unresponsive but unharmed, while the vehicle had continued under apparently autonomous control. He noted this with the specific hedging of a regional historian who is aware that 3 accounts from the 1940s and 1960s constitute a pattern but not a proof. He noted that all 3 drivers had eventually been found safely, in different circumstances, at different subsequent times, and that none of them had reported clear recollection of what had occurred between the pulling over and the finding. Derek Marsh found the historian's text on a Wednesday evening and read it twice. He noted the accounts. He noted the historian's caution. He made a note in his log. Do not stop on the Hartfield stretch. Do not open the door. He took the Hartfield run 4 more times. The shadow was now level with the back of the trailer, no longer behind the truck, alongside it at the trailer's rear, maintaining pace. He could see it in the wing mirrors as well as the rear view. It was considerably taller than the shape he had first seen in February. It had, he noted, with the precision of a man who has been logging dimensions for months, the approximate proportions of a person who is very large, not distorted, not monstrous, simply large in the way that a shape composed of dozens of people's accumulated residue might be large. The night he let it in, he had been driving for 6 hours. The pharmaceutical run was a double, 2 deliveries, a return with a second pickup, 11 hours total. He was on the A303 on the return leg at 4:55 a.m. He had been driving since 11 p.m. He had consumed the thermos and a secondary thermos he kept under the seat for emergencies, and was operating in the specific state that 11 years of overnight driving had taught him to monitor. The state in which the road ceased to have edges, in which the headlights seemed to be illuminating the same segment of tarmac on a continuous loop, in which the mirror's contents became something he processed on a slight delay. In this state, at 4:55 a.m. on the 7th mile stretch of the A303, he saw the shadow in the headlights, not in the mirrors, in the headlights. On the road surface ahead of the truck, cast by nothing, the shape of something very large walking at the truck's exact speed in the beam's forward illumination. He pulled over. He told himself, in the 6 seconds between deciding to pull over and stopping the engine, that he was pulling over because he was too tired to drive safely and needed to assess his fitness to continue. This was factually true. It was not the only reason. The shadow on the road in front of him, the shape of it, the specific quality of its patience, had the character of an invitation that he had been declining for 6 months, and had simply, in the exhaustion of 4:55 a.m. after 6 hours of driving, run out of the will to decline. He opened the cab door. The cold came in immediately. February dark, field cold, the specific edge of rural winter air at 5 a.m. He looked at the road. There was nothing there that he could see. No shadow, no shape. The headlights illuminated an empty, ordinary stretch of rural tarmac. He stepped down from the cab and stood on the verge. He did not know, afterward, how long he stood there. It was light when he found himself in the passenger seat with his hands in his lap and the truck in motion, maintaining lane, holding speed, the dashboard instruments reading normal, the road ahead proceeding correctly through the gray February dawn. His hands were in his lap. The steering wheel moved without them. He tried to raise his right hand. It stayed in his lap. He tried to turn his head. He turned it slightly. He had that at least, he could observe, and looked at the driver's side of the cab and saw his own hands on the wheel, his own posture, his own forward attention, his own driving. From the passenger seat, with his hands in his lap, he watched himself drive. The truck maintained perfect speed. It signaled correctly at the junction. It observed the 30 limit through the village. It was, by every observable standard, a truck being driven by a competent and alert professional. He felt the truck's movement through the passenger seat, the specific vibration of a long-haul vehicle on a rural road, transmitted through the seat frame and the floor and the door against which he was pressed. He felt it with a totality of physical presence that was, in its way, almost overwhelming. Every nuance of the road's surface, every slight adjustment in the steering, every gear change and brake application rendered in perfect sensory fidelity, the shadow in the driver's seat, the shape that was using his body with the focused, grateful attention of something that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this experience, drove steadily east into the growing light. It knew how to drive. It had been watching for 6 months. It drove well. Derek Marsh sat in the passenger seat and felt the road under him, and watched his own hands on the wheel, and understood that he had pulled over and opened the door and stepped down from the cab, and that all of this had been the answer to a question the shadow had been asking since February. The truck drove on, the road proceeded. The sun came up over the Wiltshire plain in the specific gray gold of a February morning, and the A303 was empty in both directions, and everything was in perfect working order. He kept a log, 6 months of documented shadow measurements, route correlations, folklore research. He found the historian's text. He read the 3 accounts. He made the note. Do not stop. Do not open the door. He had it written down. The exhaustion is real. I want to say that clearly. 11 hours, 6 hours of driving, the specific cognitive state of an experienced professional past the edge of safe alertness. That is a genuine vulnerability, not a moral failure. The passenger remnant is patient precisely because it understands human limits. It waited 6 months. It waited until the night he was on his 6th hour, past 4 a.m., alone on an empty rural road with the shadow in the headlights instead of the mirror for the first time. It stopped being behind him and got in front of him. That's when it knew it was time. What I find most disturbing about the 3 historical accounts the Wiltshire historian documented, the drivers found unresponsive in the passenger seat while their vehicles continued correctly, is the phrase none of them reported clear recollection of what occurred. Not that they were harmed, not that they were altered. They were simply absent for a period, and then present again with a gap in the record. Derek Marsh is in the passenger seat. His hands are in his lap. He is watching himself drive with the fullness of attention, the complete sensory presence of someone who has nothing else to do. The shadow knows the route now. It has the hands. It is an excellent driver. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Alara, and I am your whisperer. I'll be here, waiting for you next time. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more. This has been Karma Quietly Whispers. See you soon.